This week on Windows on the World, I'm going to be talking to the Reverend Paul Nicholson. We've done several shows with Paul, and he runs the website taxpayersagainstpoverty.org. He upholds true Christian values by highlighting the plight of the poorest in the borough. In 2013, at the age of 82, he was summoned for non-payment of council tax, with arrears and costs amounting to over £1,000. He told the court he would not pay a penny until Haringey Council restored the 100% council tax benefit for benefit claimants, and the government stopped the benefit cap he believes is destroying his community. He states civil disobedience is morally defensible when the laws being highlighted are morally indefensible. The father of 5 who has 9 grandchildren says he's prepared to go to jail for his beliefs. Paul recently asked Haringey Council auditors Grant Thornton to supply the accounting for council tax court cost summons. Now, this is something that we've covered on the show, and there's several videos on this on windowsontheworld.net website and also our YouTube channel, also on landofthefree.co.uk. We found out several years ago the council does indeed print their own summons and hires a room in a building otherwise known as a court, and they charge us £125 for the privilege of printing the paper. Now, as we previously revealed, the council tax court is an administrative process, and it's just run by the council. So unsurprisingly, the auditors and Haringey Council have gone quiet on the matter. This recent battle is just one of many that Paul has engaged in. He is all for direct action when necessary. So Paul, welcome to Windows on the World.
It's very good to be here. Yes, you're quite right. I did refuse to pay my council tax, therefore I was summoned to Tottenham Magistrates Court on the 2nd of August 2013. Yeah. And I asked to go in and speak to the magistrates because, as you're right, there are council officials outside in the waiting room making deals with people to pay off their tax over a period of time, so much a week. But I wanted to go in and talk to the magistrates, and I asked them, I said, how do you arrive at £125? Because it's the magistrates that award the cost to the council. Yes. And they refused to tell me. And in fact, they didn't know. And so I went on a process called Case Stated, which is a way of appealing against their refusal to tell me. And they made a frightful fuss about that and didn't want to do it at all. And finally, a very, very helpful QC called Helen Mudfield drafted the properly stated legal letter, and they couldn't but refuse to refuse. So they refused, mercifully, and it's exactly what we wanted them to do, because we then took them to judicial review. And to cut a long story short, Mrs. Justice Andrews decided that the position of the council and the magistrates was indefensible, and therefore my liability order was unlawful, and they declared my liability order unlawful, which probably means everybody else's liability order from 2013 to July 2015 were unlawful, not to mention the liability orders from the moment they amalgamated the cost for the summons for the costs for the liability order. And that's where we've got to now.
Just to clarify this, because previously you would get, when you actually decided to pay your council tax, or after the so-called court case, you would get the figure of the costs for the council tax court summons on that. And they also charge you for a liability order after the case.
Yes,
is that
well,
correct? Yeah.
As a result of my taking it to the auditors, in 2015, they, instead of charging everybody £125 the whole way through the system, summons and liability order, they've now reduced the summons to £102, £23 down, and they've reduced the liability order to £115, £10 down. So it's not been a complete failure, this campaign against the council tax. It has managed to reduce the cost, which of course, 20 quid you get your 20 quid if you pay your council tax arrears in full on receipt of the summons, because there's no need to go to court. And this is really why I did it. It wasn't for myself. It was because I've worked with people who can't pay their rent and their council tax and their fines for about 30 years. I founded a trust called the Zacchaeus 2000 Trust, which now looks after something over 2,000 people in London a year, but only people on benefit. We don't do mortgage or credit card debts. And so I knew perfectly well, once Haringey started taxing benefits, which is what they're doing,
Oh, yeah.
they cut the benefit, the council tax benefit, to 80%. Therefore, there's 20% left over, which has to come out of the benefits provided by central government for food, clothes, fuel, transport, and other necessities. So the amount of money left for food by the time central and local government has finished with £73.10 a week adult JSA, it's very little. And when you think as well that adult JSA of £73.10 a week is probably paying the benefit tax of £20, what was £73.10 a week in March 13 has been reduced by £40. I'd say, well, it's anything up to £30, leaving not enough to live on. And this is why we've got this flood of new food banks, because people have to find food. People hate going. It's a humiliating thing to go anywhere near a food bank. And the people who are running food banks, the only positive thing about it is the people who didn't know how bad it was, now running food banks, are beginning to learn there's some really serious poverty problems around in Haringey. And there are. In 2013-14, the year when they started taxing benefits, the council issued 32,000 summonses and 21,000 liability orders. And the trouble is, because they were charging £25, if you didn't know how much you were going to get back if you paid off in full at the point of the summons, which for somebody who's only got 20 quid left of the arrears could be important.
Well, yeah, it's a difference
You
now
see?
between over £100, isn't it?
Well, it's £102 now,
Yeah.
but that's because they've reduced it. But back in 2013, it was £125 for everything, but they didn't tell anyone that how much you would get off if you paid your council tax in full at the point of the summons, so you didn't have to go to court.
Well, the summons is one of their big money-making scams, really, because...
Well, you see, there's a big issue there. During the research that came up, because somebody else, by the way, had been asking freedom of information questions, I was reading the Haringey Independent, and I suddenly found that the write-up about me refusing to pay my council tax and the court case, excellently done by the Haringey Independent, I have to say, was getting answers, was getting comments. And the man I never met, who may not exist, maybe a nom de plume, called Arnold Lane. If Arnold Lane ever gets to hear this, will Arnold Lane please get in touch with me? Was asking all the right parliamentary questions, and from that we discovered that way back in 2004, there'd been a decision by the council to charge as much as possible to act as a deterrent to latent non-payers and to help fund enforcement activity, which is turning the court costs into a tax,
Exactly.
which is specifically unlawful.
Yeah.
And we're still having this battle in the court. Because I was unsatisfied with the report the decision and report provided by Johnson. Because I was unsatisfied with the decision and report provided by Grant Thornton, I have taken them to the High Court. And we still can't get that accepted by the judge. And I lost the case, and as I was telling you, the judge decided it was not a matter of public interest. And I really have to appeal that, because I simply cannot believe in law or in practice or in any reasonable sense of anybody's head that 32,000 liability or 32,000 summonses sent out to residents of Haringey is not a matter of public interest. It has to be a matter of public interest.
Well, it is, and there's two public interests. There's our public interest and the public interest of the state. It's not in the state's interest to let the public know certain things, because this is massive and it affects everybody in the country. Yeah. And it's a huge amount of money that the council's raking in from this. So you've taken the lid off something that they obviously want to put the lid back onto, really.
Well, they have been dealing with these things without informing the public. I mean, increasing the cost by £30 in 2010, you don't know about that until you actually get your summons or a liability order. The whole process of dealing with my complaint to Grant Thornton, my objection to the accounts, which anyone's allowed to do, by the way, to Grant Thornton, was dealt with privately. One of my points, which I'm taking on appeal now, is that I wasn't sent the necessary letter. It was simply sent to Grant Thornton by Haringey Council. And then there was no report produced in the public interest. Well, the law has been written that I can't appeal that. But I reckon that there is a principle of public interest, which when auditors are dealing with the local authorities, they are our representative. They're not the local authorities' representative. And how are we, as members
They're working
of the
for a public body, and you were asking for information which should be in the public domain.
Well, it should indeed, yeah. But the role of the auditor is a role, it's been described by their own professional body. Audit is a public interest activity. Yeah. They're there for us. How are we to be sure that the accounts are properly done unless we rely totally on the auditor? Now, this has got to be settled, because up until 2012, the audit was done by a public body called the Audit Commission. And as is the way of all things these days, they privatised the auditing of local authorities. And Grant Thornton got 3 or 4 local authorities, from which they make a happy amount of money. And there is a conflict of interest between them auditing the accounts of the local authority and paying the local authority and being paid by the local authority for auditing their accounts. And so it has to be settled that the role of the auditor is one in the public interest and not necessarily in their own or in the local authority's interest. And I'm hoping by going to appeal that we'll be able to settle that. The other thing about going to appeal is that because it wasn't a matter of public interest, I found myself landed with £50,000 worth of costs for the case that Grant Thornton had hired the very expensive solicitors. Grant Thornton is a very wealthy international accountancy company, so they can afford to do that. And because I lost the case that I'm now appealing, I got £50,000 worth of costs. But if the judge had decided it was a matter of public interest, then I would not have had to pay the costs.
Well, it seems to have been reversed, because when you looked into this, it was stated by the court that it was in the public interest.
Well, you're quite right. Mrs. Justice Andrews, in the first case, did say it was a matter of public interest, and that's very useful because there's a conflict of opinion between 2 High Court judges.
Well, it's very interesting. We're going to take a short break, but that really says a lot about the way local authorities are being run. And you've uncovered something which is potentially very big that we need to get out there. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes. In your opinion, do you think the jury was led?
It's not mine to say.
Very diplomatic. Tell the viewers a bit about what happened to you.
Well, they bribed 3 criminals to come in and give hearsay.
If a bomb went off in London and took 92 lives, yeah, would you want to be on the payroll of that?
It's all based on models and projections.
It's all over bother shouting.
In order to get me in prison, they probably broke, a couple dozen laws.
Free Yolanda. Y'all planted drugs on Yolanda, and we're gonna get her released and get the crooked cops busted.
That gave all the officers time for their adrenaline
to slow down so we wouldn't get shot.
Welcome back to Windows on the World. I'm with the Reverend Paul Nicholson, and we're talking about this very important case about council tax court costs. So, Paul, welcome back.
Well, it's nice to be here still.
It's nice to be anywhere these days, isn't it, the way things are going?
It's good to see you. Yes, we were. We were talking about this question of £125 costs and how they arrive at £125. And the upshot of involving Grant Thornton is they wrote a report and made a decision. And that report was by no means entirely washing the face of the local authority. It spread a little bit of mud on its face.
Can you explain that a bit?
Well, in particular, they said that they couldn't agree the sum that they were charging, which was 125, and they made various recommendations, like they should have reviewed it since 2010. That was the last time they did actually review it, and they would like to see slightly less objective figures, which is rather a polite way of saying not over-egging the pudding, putting a bit too much in there, and so on.
Yeah.
And that led to the council with the auditors reviewing the costs. And they came to the decision that it was going to be £102, not 125 for a summons, and 115, not 125, when you get the liability order.
Well, we actually touched on that in the first part of the show, but this is really the crux of it, is that if their audit, all this is really about is asking where the money was paid out, isn't it? Where does the £125
exactly right.
actually go?
Yeah.
And this is what Grant Thornton have a problem with trying to disclose.
Well, when I asked the question, how do you arrive at £125, they refused to tell me. However, my son, Roderick, was there with his laptop, and I'd asked him to make a complete record of anything that was said in court. And what they came up with at that time was, oh, it's perfectly all right. We've got an agreement with the magistrates in 2010, and we have an exchange of emails. And that apparently justified £125. It didn't tell me anything about what was in that £125.
So basically the council told the magistrates they were going to charge £125. The magistrate said that was okay. Was that what happened?
Well, that is exactly what happened.
Right, okay.
In 2010, it wasn't even the magistrates.
But that's not accounting or auditing, is it?
No, it isn't. it was a clerk.
Yeah.
In the magistrate. No, what happened was that an official in Haringey Council, not even the councillor, wrote to sent an email to a particular Hi Jonathan or something. We'd like to put it up by £30, and Jonathan didn't answer. So there was another email later on in March saying, we want to do it tomorrow. Oh, and then Jonathan, his name wasn't Jonathan. Okay, well, you can do it. And so that was how they settled the increase of £30 of the costs of liability. Now, I've been arguing in court that all we had on the 2nd of August 2013 was this information, and the costs, the calculations were 2010 calculations, and even they weren't accurate. And however, I can't get the judge at the moment, or the judge last week, to actually get his mind around that, because the problem with so many people, the judges and the lawyers, is they know very little about how council tax is enforced and administered.
Yeah. They have a local government finance act 1992, and they kind of refer to that all the time.
So you have to start explaining the whole process from the beginning. And the big mistake that the judge has made, which we'll still have to prove, is that that it was perfectly all right to charge 125 for a summons because all the costs were summons, and the council had decided that all the costs were a summons, and they didn't have to charge extra for the liability order, which is very odd because all the other councils charged two, one for the summons and one for the liability
Yes.
order. And it's even more odd when you think, from your own experience and mine, is that after the summons, there is a liability order hearing. And in the court at that time, there are staff members. They have to have transport from the local authority across in Wood Green to come to Tottenham Magistrates Court. They have, no doubt, telephone expenditure after the summons. So there has to be two in practice and legally. And this is something that has to be appealed. And I'm just hoping we get a good barrister to work for us this time, and not it won't be the vicar doing it.
Yeah, and
like
you need
that.
you need somebody who's
Yeah.
going to be totally
Well, you
impartial
get
in this,
your head
because
around the law.
you've uncovered something very big here,
Yes,
which
exactly.
affects everyone in the country.
Yes.
And it's,
Well,
it's
that's
potentially
right.
very serious. And it's not really just about that the courts being an administrative process. It's that they think that it's okay for someone to send an email to somebody in a court on a first name basis, and they're saying we're putting the cost of the council tax summonses up, and they go, okay, well, that's really not the way it should work.
No, it isn't indeed, and there is guidance from the DCLG making it clear that is not the way it should work. I asked endless freedom of information questions of the magistrates, and they have no record at all of the magistrates making any attempt to question whether or not that £30 increase was legal. And in fact, there's no record at all ever discussing it. So it wasn't done by the magistrates at all. And now their new procedure is quite extraordinary as well, because I had to ask the Parliament a freedom of information question about this. What happens is that the local authority went along indeed in July, having reduced the costs, swore on oath that the costs all appear in the local authority accounts. But there's no detail there. It's a complete fudge.
So they say the details are in the accounts, but the auditors can't find them.
Well, they say they're all recorded in the accounts, but there's no detail whatever. And the magistrates accepted it, so that was another way of this time reducing the costs, but getting the magistrates' approval. The guidance in the DCLG says the magistrates may want to be satisfied, and I think they should want to be satisfied. They are adding that money to the arrears of anyone who's late or non-payment of their council tax.
Well, that's right, and it's done, as we were talking earlier, administratively. It's just the computer that does it after a certain amount of time. The computer prints it out.
Yeah, but the decision to charge is the magistrates.
Yes.
Because it's like any court case. The case of the winner, that the costs of the winner are paid by the loser. Yeah. Like I'm paying, I'm meant to pay this £50,000. So it's like that, and the rules are very strict about that. That they have to be only the costs incurred in the obtaining of that particular judgment.
Of course, otherwise it's a potential fraud. And
it's not in that; it becomes a tax.
Yes,
it's an additional tax.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And and of course, the words used by Grant Thornton are broadly reasonable, or not unreasonable.
So the costs aren't unreasonable.
Haringey's costs are broadly reasonable and not unreasonable.
But that's not their job to make or give an opinion on what the costs are. It's their job to tell you how they were incurred.
Well, this is my argument that there are very tight regulations which have to be, and it's their job to see they're obeyed. And broadly reasonable and not unreasonable really don't answer And another thing that irritated me enormously about the procedures, which I was not involved in, and which emerged later, was that they went off with the local authority to meet, to see the figures of some cases who were being charged £125. And I don't know whether they were enormously wealthy people for whom £125 would be no problem whatever, or whether they were the people on £73 and 10 pence a week for whom £125 is a huge problem. But all we know is that they met some cases, or they looked at some cases and decided that the costs were reasonable. Now, when I go to court with somebody to try and get a reduction in a fine, for example, which I've done, what I do is I write out all the details of their expenditure, all the details of their costs and their income, and their complete debts. It may be 5,000, 3,000, 150, but they put all the debts down. And that evidence is what the magistrates use to determine the level of the payment, or even use their power to remit the costs, because they have a power to remit.
It's also the auditor's job to supply where the money was paid out. We're going to have a short break, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Windows on the World. I'm with the Reverend Paul Nicholson. We're talking about the issues facing the people who are least able to pay their debts and bills in the present economic climate. So welcome back, Paul.
Well, it's nice to be keeping going on this discussion with you. I think we've reached a very, very serious situation socially and economically from the point of view of the bottom 20% of income levels, and particularly those who are on benefit. And the way in which the sanctions are administered is entirely unfair. I think if we're going to administer something like a sanction, it should be done where you can get independent representation in court, because a sanction is a very, very severe punishment.
And it was found out through a leaked email, I think at Walthamstow Job Centre, that these sanctions are done in blocks. Basically, I think each advisor had to make 3 a day. I may be incorrect there, but that information is available in the public domain. We also did a show called Job Centres Corrupt, ? Where someone who used to work as a civil servant went through all the processes, and he managed to get his benefits back each time he was sanctioned. But most people aren't in that fortunate position with that tenacity or knowledge. So how do we get people to basically get together on this? Because I think that's what needs to happen now, because they're calling it social cleansing or gentrification, but really what it's about is they're creating a huge underclass. So how can we do something about that, bearing in mind what you've just said about your court case, which you requested this information, which should be in the public domain already, which was not given to you?
I mean, I think it's very, very difficult. What I'm genuinely worried about is the way in which affordable housing is defined. It's defined as 80% of the local median rent. And now 80% of the local median rent is attached to the market. So 80% goes up, like 100% goes up. And 80% will be taking more and more and more of an income, just as much as 100% will be taking more and more of an income that is needed for food, clothes, fuel, and transport. Now they're promising, in order to solve the housing problem, which is colossal, to build more houses. But that's going to take 10 years. Meanwhile, there are people paying rent whose rent will continue to go up, and there won't be any affordable housing for a long, long time. And there are experts that I've been talking to who say never, until a radical change is made. So when you talk about community getting together, I think the community isn't aware that what's being promised them isn't going to happen.
I think that's becoming more apparent now, though, because we did a show about this, with what has happened in Lambeth with the demolition of the council estates,
Yeah, I
which is
saw
going
that.
on everywhere, and the way the councils are giving limited choices or no choice at all to the local residents about how this progresses. And this is happening all over London, and people are now finding that they don't have any input at local level. That's the most important thing that they need to realise, that their input has been taken away.
What I'm trying to say is that they, not having input at local level isn't enough, because they're being promised one day housing will be affordable. Under the present structures of the housing market in this country, it will never be affordable.
That's absolutely correct.
Renters are the
Yeah.
ones that I'm worried about.
Yeah.
People who can afford to buy their own houses will be able to buy their own houses, and under the present scheme, their equity in the property will go higher and higher, and so they'll come up with some more money than they went in.
Yeah, I'm also
it's-
talking about the
it-
buy-to-let
it-
market,
it-
which
it-
seems to be quite...
Well, indeed,
yeah,
and the buy-to-let
yeah.
will do very nicely, thanks
That's
to
right.
that.
Yeah.
And indeed, the buy-to-let can say, I would now like to make my pile, I'm going to sell the property, you're all out because I need vacant possession. And that is murder. What in addition to the money available from the previous generation, one of the most serious aspects is both national and international speculation. There are, I think it's 800,000 plots of land in the land banks of the 4 major builders in this country, just not doing anything. And because they're waiting to make a massive profit on it when they get a chance to build it.
That's right, and that is going on all over the country.
It is indeed. And so that's another big problem, because it's cutting down all the time the chances that there will be affordable housing. So what's got to happen? People have got to really understand they're never going to have affordable housing until there's a major change in the system. Otherwise, we're not campaigning for the right thing.
That's right.
The two things need to happen. One is there needs to be rent controls, and they need to be quite soon. And the other is there needs to be something called land value tax. Land value tax works like this, and we have to go to Hong Kong in order to understand it, because the land in Hong Kong was leased from the Chinese. So the government could not sell the land. So the government leased the land to anybody who wanted to use it, whether it's for a home, a factory, an office, social activities, whatever. You have to pay rent to the government, and it's on the value of your land. And that is what they run government on. So Taxpayers Against Poverty is campaigning for land value tax and the abolition of council tax, the abolition of business rates, and the abolition of stamp duty. And when we see how it works, land value tax, and in practice, there may well be an opportunity to reduce income tax. Now, the probability is that most people would not pay, it would not affect most people any more than the current council tax, except the higher up the end of the whole business you go, the more likely you're going to be paying more tax. The great advantage of it is that we know where they live. You can't put land in an overseas bank. So every bit of land in here will be paying for local and national government. And there's no good anyone saying, I'm going to put this in the Bahamas or put this in, because land won't.
You're removing a lot of third parties there out of the equation, which is very good, and that's the way it should be.
Yes, yes.
In fact, it's a more ancient kind of way of looking at it. It's an older system of law. Welcome back to Windows on the World. I'm with the Reverend Paul Nicholson. We're just going to sum up in this last part of the show and really try and find a little bit of a solution as to where to go from here, because Paul has now got the issue of the costs of council tax summonses into the High Court, and the last case he had, he's been left with the costs and no questions have really been answered. So Paul, where do we go from here?
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, the thing is we've got to find a lawyer who will take this on. And I'm working through the excellent organisation called the Bar Pro Bono Unit, who find a lawyer who will not actually charge me the costs. The costs, incidentally, if we win, are given to the Access to Justice Trust to help other people. These lawyers are hugely generous. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing to do. And my first case was helped on that basis by Helen Mountfield. She is still advising on this, but she's got 2 other pro bono cases she's currently involved in. So they're pretty good people. What I'm looking for, of course, is if it is just to deal with this public interest issue and to get the court to agree that it is a matter of public interest, because if it's a matter of public interest, then the issue becomes, do I have to pay the costs? And they can make an order that I don't have to pay the costs, even though currently there is an order saying I do have to pay £50,000, which is a bit unrealistic because they can't really get what I don't have. The other thing I want out of it is for the fact that these costs, which were available in 2013 on the 2nd of August, when I was in court, saying how do you arrive at these costs, which were only calculated way back in 2010, and there've been no review up to that point.
Yeah, it goes back to
And they are
2010.
saying they cannot do anything about that because the accounts for 2010 are closed. I don't buy that for one second.
How can they be closed? This is a public body that's funded by the public.
It appeared in 2013,
Yeah.
and if they can't audit 3 million quid's worth of income and related expenditure in Haringey Council's accounts in 2013, then there's something wrong, and so I want that to be one, and I do want the public interest issue to solve. So those 3 major points, with some other, particularly the process through which they put citizens who make objections to the accounts. It should be a far more equal treatment of me. I'm objecting to Haringey's accounts. The auditor should treat me equally to Haringey, whereas I wasn't. It was all done privately with Haringey, and I was kept outside.
Exactly, they're doing it all in private, but
That's right.
they're really duty bound to answer this,
Yeah.
because there's no way that it's not in the public interest.
Absolutely.
And maybe people should get on board here and start asking their local authorities themselves how these costs are incurred.
Well, I I think there's no reason why I shouldn't. I know it's happening. I mean, I've been getting phone calls from all around the country because it's a public case. And there are other people challenging their own local authority on their costs.
Yeah.
And that's happening a lot. But here, having reduced them very recently, I don't think we're going to make much headway until we get this question of my case settled. But the other thing is that the privatization of the auditing of local authorities' accounts has put private culture into public duty. And I want it to be settled that when the private auditing company is auditing public money in the local authorities, they have a responsibility to us, the people, and not to the council. Who are we to trust that's going to be sure that the council is spending the money properly unless we can trust the auditor?
Well, in this case, there should be full disclosure.
Unless the auditor is responsible and is made in law responsible to us and not to the council, not to their client who pays them to do the audit, but to the public, we're not going to get anywhere.
And really, this should be the duty of the court, because this is a matter that's in the public interest. So
Well, this is exactly right, and I've briefed the people who are going to find the lawyer that that is an issue which must be resolved. It's because, you see, until 2012, the auditing of local authority accounts was done by a public body with a spirit of public service.
Exactly.
But then it was privatized, like everything is these days. And that has definite disadvantages from the point of view of the public.
They're putting into the private what should be public, and that's wrong.
Well, it's all right if the private body has a duty of public interest.
Yes. Well, yes, exactly. Can you just give us a bit more information about your website, the background of it, and
Oh, yes.
what you're doing at the moment?
Well, I mean, I founded something called the Zacchaeus 2000 Trust back in the poll tax days, because I found people in my parish who simply were having a dreadful time having an enormous amount of tax taken out of their income, out of their very low income by the poll tax. And I realized that a lot of other people must have these problems, and so a group of us Christians got together this charity, which now only works for people on benefit. It doesn't do mortgage debts, doesn't do credit card debts. I then got a bit fed up with the Charity Commission, and beginning to say charities couldn't do this, charities couldn't say that. And so I withdrew as chairman from the Zacchaeus 2000 Trust, remained a trustee, and founded Taxpayers Against Poverty, which is not a charity. So I can say exactly what I think needs to be said without being got at by the Charity Commissioner. And so the law I'm out of that bit of law and free to say what needs to be said. I hope I say what needs to be said. The other aspect of it is we've set up, we're going to improve our social media, but we've got the basics at the moment. We've got a website called taxpayersagainstpoverty.org.uk, and we've got a Facebook, and at the moment we want to be on Taxpayers Against Poverty Extra. We've also got Taxpayers Against Poverty, which has 15,600 likes, and our Extra is building up with another 200. So we got nearly 16,000 likes on our Facebook. And we get a lot of interesting support from the media community, and have a lot of good relationships with it. So sign up, go on to our website at taxpayersagainstpoverty.org.uk, go on to our Facebook page at Taxpayers Against Poverty Extra, and we have Twitter at it's taxpayers_A_P at taxpayers_A_P. That's
You'll
right.
put that on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all very lively, and going to get more lively. And there is a terrific future, of course, in this community of people now who have a lot of communications. I think there's one last thing I'd like to say is you're right in the sense, and I'm very grateful to you for saying it, that I do hope I'm promoting Christian values. But the most important value of all, which is, and it was indeed a Jewish value and was picked up by Jesus and endorsed by Jesus as a Christian value, it's to love your neighbor as yourself. And so the motivating force here is what's called the gratuitous love of God and our gratuitous love of each other. We love without expecting anything in return. Love is a gift. And one of the gifts of love we can give is to work with people who can't cope with the current debted system. So that's why I do it. It's inspired and motivated by my Christian faith.
Well, that's a great place to leave it, but that's also a brilliant point, because this is the sort of thinking that will start to change things, in the respect that small amounts of people getting together and doing things pretty selflessly, really, and is opposite to what's actually happening and what's being enforced on them by corporations. So a way round it is to actually do that, because small people can have a great effect, and you've had a great effect. This case is, the potential for this is so huge. I think that's why it's been shut down at the present time. But I think that if the public get behind this, we could see the reduction in the amount that local authorities are charging for these summonses and this administrative process.
Well,
So
I think too, and hope that we can have a move, a move from an economy dominated by extreme free market ideology, which is a brutal ideology. It's an inhuman ideology, which means that the price of everything determines the health of everybody. You know, the price of a house determines how much money you've got left for food, whereas there ought to be some relationship between the price, your rent, and the amount of income, the minimum income you can get in the nation. The cutting of housing benefit, which is entirely market-orientated issue, means that people are paying rent out of income needed for food, clothes, fuel, and transport. So the central theme of loving your neighbour as yourself, which for me is part of my Christian faith, but for others is part of a Muslim faith, part of a Hindu faith, part of the Buddhists. It's a centre of all faiths, and so we can cooperate right across the board with being motivated by this notion of love as a gift. Love as a gift we give to each other.
Exactly. And in the process, we might be able to cut out some of the administrators.
Well, yes, indeed.
Exactly, and you're doing a great job. Thanks. That's Reverend Paul Nicholson, and he's from taxpayersagainstpoverty.org.uk. We put all the information up on the screen. Thanks a lot, Paul, and we'll see you soon on Windows on the World.
Thanks to Windows on the World.
Keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.